All you had was a bed, a light, a slop bucket. The Germans would walk, keeping an eye on people down below. Just not knowing, that's the strange feeling. You remember those days of lockdown when people felt like they were prisoners in their own homes? Well, that would have been nothing in comparison to knowing that the occupiers are holding you prison. And that's a really strange thing.
Today, we're journeying into a piece of history that sits in Scheveningen, a coastal district of The Hague in the Netherlands. But this isn't your typical city tour. No, today, I'm visiting a place with a story that is as dark as it is profound. A place that echoes with the voices of those who fought for freedom. Welcome to the Oranjehotel. Well, I am the wandering Englishman, and you might be wondering, why is it called a hotel? It's not a hotel in its traditional sense. The Oranjehotel was the nickname given to the notorious prison where thousands of Dutch resistance fighters, political prisoners and civilians were detained during the Second World War. Among them was my own grandfather, Rene van Terheyden. He was imprisoned here for 30 days, a story that gives this place a deeply personal significance for me. So join me as we step into a piece of my family's history and explore the sobering reality of the Oranjehotel.
A very grey day, I find myself in Scheveningen. That is a little district of The Hague, and The Hague is obviously in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is a place very close to my heart. Despite being called the Wandering Englishman, my grandfather was actually a Dutchman. I'm a little bit of a mongrel, but these doors potentially were very, very sinister to my grandfather. This is called the Oranjehotel, not because the doors are orange or anything, but because of the people that were held here as prisoners during the Second World War, and my grandfather was one of them. He was a dissident, he was a rebel, and I'm going to go and investigate this place because it's basically been open since 2019, and it's about time that I visited this monumental place. Join me. Part of this compound, or this area, is not just apartments or houses, it's actually a working prison. So there's still prisoners in this sort of vicinity, and I just tried walking into the wrong place. I'm going this way. It's going to be an interesting experience, I think. During the Second World War, prisoners just like my grandfather were taken through these gates and also taken out of these gates. Only when they were taken out of these gates were they executed. They were executed a little bit over there in the distance. 250 men were taken from this prison and executed by the Nazis. Thankfully, many prisoners survived to tell the tale and to tell of the hardships that they faced.
Once the Nazis acquired this prison, the prison quickly became a holding ground for anyone accused of resisting the occupation. Spies, saboteurs, political prisoners, and everyday citizens who dared to oppose the new regime. It didn't take long for this grim place to earn the nickname Oranjehotel, a nod to the Dutch royal family, the House of Orange. For those who were locked up inside, the name served as a symbol of defiance and loyalty to the Dutch resistance. Imagine every day within these walls was a battle of spirit where patriotism collided with the brutality of the occupying force. Life inside the Oranjehotel was harsh. The cells were small, cold and overcrowded, and prisoners were constantly under the watchful eyes of the Nazi guards. Communication with the outside world was nearly impossible, and the future for many of these prisoners was grim. Death sentences or deportation to labor camps loomed large. But despite the fear, the Oranjehotel became a hub of quiet resistance. Many of the prisoners left behind messages of hope and solidarity on the walls of their cells. Known today as the graffiti of the resistance, it's amazing how something as simple as a few scratch words could carry so much power. A popular symbol drawn on the walls was the letter V, standing for victory, and Vrijheid, which means freedom. These symbols and phrases became beacons of resilience, offering a glimmer of hope during one of the darkest times in Dutch history. Now let me share a more personal side of this history. My grandfather, Rene van Terheyden, was imprisoned here at the Oranjehotel in March 1941, a time forever etched in our family's memory. According to the Oranjehotel records, he was detained for 30 days. Though he never spoke much about his time during the war, the few details I've learned reveal the grim reality of life inside these walls. Each day began with a harsh routine. Once awoken, my grandfather, like many others, was forbidden from sitting or lying on his bed during the day. The strict rules allowed no comfort. Instead, he would spend the day pacing in his cell or standing on the cold, hard floor. So this is exactly the size of cell he would have been sharing with two other people. As you can see, I'm holding the camera and I'm 2 inches away from my arm from touching the wall. There's not much space. There would have been one bed where I'm standing and the door obviously here. And the door food would have been basically put through here. Apparently, according to recounts, it would have been dropped if you didn't catch it, so food would have gone all over the floor. And there would have been a slop bucket down in the corner. The stench, it wouldn't just be you taking a crap, it would be your two cellmates taking a crap and a piss. However, the food was pretty bad, so how much excrement would be discharged is anyone's guess, but it wasn't pleasant. When the war came to an end, these cells were used for people that were German collaborators were put in these cells. Prison reverted back to its normal functionality by 1949, but really, really strange being here and just witnessing the conditions and what it would have been like. He was only allowed out of his cell once a day, and that brief moment of freedom was no real relief. So a cell just like this would have been holding my grandfather. The cell obviously no longer exists, but the corridors still exist and some of the cells are still intact. But it's frightening to think that all you had was a bed, a light. They did have a light, but it was out at 8 p.m. every day. A slop bucket, and the slop bucket was cleared out once a day, and that was his opportunity to come out of his cell and walk down a corridor and had a little bit of exercise. And this process would be repeated every single day. And above us, this is where the Germans would walk, keeping an eye on people down below. The prisoners were taken down the corridor to the yard, where they would walk under the watchful eyes of the guards. During this time, their slop bowls used for waste would be emptied and replaced. It's weird to think that potentially my grandfather and, well, thousands of others, this was the only area they had for exercise, because their cells were just here, and the gate they would have been led to if they were being executed, there was 250 people that were led through that gate to then be taken to the sand dunes to be executed. It's hard to comprehend just what went on here. I've been to a lot of concentration camps around Europe. If you're curious about Auschwitz, if you're curious about Fort 7, you can watch those videos, but this is very different, this one. This is a prison, and what's really strange is just right on the edge over here, this wall over here is actual real prison walls. There are real prisoners behind here. It's a functioning prison. It's only this corner that's been cornered off due to the historicalness of it, and it's been now turned into a museum. But Slobodan Milosevic was held here as a prisoner before he was trialed. This is a strange place. It's just weird to think the pacing that would have happened of the prisoners, not knowing if the war was ever going to end or not knowing if they were going to be sent elsewhere. Just not knowing, that's a strange feeling. You remember those days of lockdown when people felt like they were prisoners in their own homes? Well, that would have been nothing in comparison to knowing that the occupiers are holding you prison. And that's a really strange thing. But it's amazing what we're capable of. Let's go back in the prison. The Oranjehotel was not just a place of confinement, For many, it was their final stop. The infamous death cells housed those who were sentenced to execution by the Nazis.
And this is the corridor he would have been walking down every day, because this cell was right at the end over here. And the awful thing is he'd have to walk past cell 601, which is still intact, and this is the cell that's completely intact. Apparently this is the death cell, so people would eventually, who would end up in here, would eventually be executed. So people would be seen here, and then they would be taken away, and then never to be seen again. And he'd have to witness that every time there was the slot bucket was being cleared out. He'd walk down this corridor, down past this, and then he would notice that the person was no longer there, and that was an ongoing theme. But it was far worse if you were in this, far worse.
Many prominent figures from the Dutch resistance were executed in a nearby dune area after their time at the Oranjehotel. Walking through these cells today, you can't help but feel the weight of history pressing down. The stories of men and women who refuse to surrender their beliefs, even in the face of death, are both heartbreaking and inspiring. Memorials have been established to honor those who gave their lives, ensuring that their bravery will never be forgotten. It's hard to imagine the psychological strain of such living conditions, day in and day out with little to no contact or comfort. Sadly, much of this chapter in my grandfather's life remains unknown. Like many from his generation, he seldom spoke of the war or his experiences in prison. This silence only deepens the weight of visiting the Oranjehotel today. Walking through these halls, knowing that my grandfather endured this place, fills me with a profound sense of connection and loss. His silence spoke volumes about the trauma faced by those who were imprisoned here, a pain that was too heavy to hear, even in words. For me, standing in these corridors, it's hard not to wonder about what he must have been thinking during his silent days. What gave him strength? How did he endure? Though we'll never really fully know. Visiting the Oranjehotel allows me and everyone else who comes here to walk in the footsteps of those like my grandfather and those who were less lucky who never got to leave, to honor their quiet resilience. Standing here today, knowing my grandfather once occupied one of these cells, it feels surreal. It's a deeply personal reminder of the sacrifices and strength shown by so many who fought for freedom. It's humbling to think that my grandfather walked these same halls, faced the uncertainty of what would happen next, and somehow he survived. He was one of the lucky ones, for many imprisoned all over Europe were far less lucky, and his brief stint was their mistake, because he would then go on to fight them after he left. But that story is for another day.
I now stand effectively where his cell used to be. So he would have been pacing back basically between here, all the way to here. Look, the only exit would have been here, door. But as you can see, this has all been bashed through and it's been turned into the sort of foyer. But this would have been cell 537. This would have been the door just here.
Today, the Oranjehotel stands as a national memorial, open to visitors who want to learn about the critical chapter in Dutch history. The preserved cells, including the death cells, allow us to walk in the footsteps of those who lived and died for their ideals. The museum also displays personal items, letters and testimonies from former prisoners, making the experience all the more poignant. One of the most powerful features is the Remembrance Chapel, a simple yet moving space dedicated to reflection and remembrance. It's a place where visitors can pause and pay their respects to the thousands of people who were imprisoned here. For me, visiting this place is not just about understanding history, it's about connecting with it. It's about honoring the past, remembering the sacrifices made, and never forgetting the lessons learned from that dark period. The Oranjehotel is a symbol of resilience of the human spirit, a place where bravery and defiance shone through. Even in the darkest of times, whether you're a history buff or someone with personal ties to the Second World War, like myself, visiting this site offers an emotional an eye-opening glimpse into the lives of those who stood against oppression.
Well, that was my grandfather's prison that he spent 30 days in, it turns out. I learnt that today. I had no idea how long he'd spent there. So effectively he was there during March 1941. Thankfully he got out because it was a minor misdemeanor that he was in for before effectively, well, carrying on with the war and the resistance. And yeah, it's a strange being here, but I'm really glad that I got to come here. And I think everyone that gets a chance to come to The Hague should really visit this place. It's a fantastic place to visit. It's only been open since 2019. Do check it out.
So if you find yourself wandering through The Hague of the district I can't pronounce, Scheveningen, take a time to visit the OranjHotel. Walk the halls, read the words left behind by the prisoners, and remember the strength of those who fought for freedom, even when faced with impossible odds. Until next time, keep exploring, keep remembering, and always keep wondering.